Hello, my name is Victoria.
And my name is Enray.
This is History Wars, where we go back in time to talk to history with the locals in the past.
We wish to introduce concepts in history through the lens of historical figures by inviting them on the show to have a chat about their lives, their beliefs, and their history.
Today we are focusing on national identity. Specifically, we want to answer the question, how did national identity change during the foreign occupation around World War II? To show that national identity can become a defense mechanism against the ethnically similar country's occupation, to foster unity against the ruling regime.
Our special guest today is Yap Seng-gyat from Japanese-occupied Formosa during the Second World War, who lived through Japanese-colonized Taiwan, World War II, and Republic of China-occupied Taiwan. Through the power of his diary, we are able to revisit his life during the Second World War period and demonstrate what his views could be about regarding our topic, national identity.
Good morning, afternoon, night, sir, and welcome to the podcast. Before we start, could you be so kind and introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, Victoria. My name can be Yap Seng-gyat, Yu Sakiichi, or Ye Shenji, but please call me Seng-gyat, as it is my native tongue Hokkien. I was born in 1923 and raised in Tainan-shu in southern Taiwan. I was a doctor in Taiwan and spoke Hokkien, Mandarin, Japanese, English, French, and German.
Nice to meet you, Seng-gyat. Please tell me more about your life, especially the changes in your name, since name and language impact a person's identity significantly.
Though I was raised in a rich family, as a Han Chinese in colonial Taiwan, I was the only 6 Han Chinese students in my middle school since it was a Japanese-only school, with only special permissions for Han students. I always had a Hokkien name Seng-gyat and the Japanese pronunciation of the same characters, Yu Sakiichi. I used these two names interchangeably as my father calls me in Hokkien, but in school, Sekiichi was preferred. In 1941, I changed my name to Tatsuya Hayama due to the new Japanization movement in Taiwan, and I embraced my identity as a Japanese Formosan. In my school years in Taiwan, we celebrate Day of Public Duty for the Development of Asia every month to show our dedication to the Japanese policy and learn about the end of the shogunate period in school. Went to Shinto shrines and learned about the Great East Asia Prosperity Sphere. We even cheered when Japan declared war on the US and UK. Now that I think of it, I believe I was pretty Japanese.
What changed after that?
I traveled to Sendai, northern Japan for high school in 1943, which is when I learned about the many theories of race and ideologies. I learned about the world's hatred towards the Jews, and I learned about the supreme Japanese race and fascism in the Aryan race. I truly believe that these were correct. However, deep inside, my discourse with fellow Formosians and watching movies about how the Chinese heroically rebelled against the UK during the opium incidents slowly made me aware of who I belonged to. I started to realize the discriminations we face as Formosians under Japanese colonial rule. We had to pick up the leftovers from the Japanese, and even though I speak the same language, eat the same food, we share a different tradition only half a century ago. If we are the same, why would you separate us from us during elementary school? I started to learn Mandarin and search for Hokkien materials. I even changed the language in my diary to Chinese just to practice. Finally, when the World War II ended, the Emperor announced a conditional surrender on August 15, 1945. On that day, I commemorate the 450-year struggle of the Taiwanese, and on Double 10 Day, which is the Chinese national holiday, I pledged my allegiance to the Republic of China flag and believed that I was a Chinese in the Chinese national event in Tokyo the same year.
Wow, that must have been such a change.
Yes, I started reading the work of Sun Yat-sen while finishing my medicine degree in Tokyo. We talked a lot about the new struggles for Taiwan after the Republic of China took power and criticized the Japanese for their attitude against the Chinese. I vividly remember singing Mandarin songs and vow against the cultural invasions of the Japanese. I was determined to move back to Taiwan to rejuvenate my hometown. After returning back to Taiwan in 1846, my first impression of the Keelung port was horrible. It was half a year after the government's landing in Taiwan, but the railways are in terrible conditions. Most of Taipei was still destroyed by the bombs from the war. However, I kept faith in the government. In this difficult time, we cannot expect the government to solve all problems in one step, but the Chinese nation will be victorious in the end. I was delighted to hear the celebrations when the army landed in Taiwan. We finally can govern ourselves.
You seem to have found your identity now.
No. Far from that. As I transferred back to med school in Taipei, I realized this government was not so different from the Japanese. Although we are all Chinese, we had a different government structure than all the other provinces of China, and almost all of the government administrators are from the mainland. I visit Shanghai, but to realize we are similar but different, linguistically, culturally, and politically. It seems like a foreign country to me. In the end, we did not have the power I expected, and we were forcefully adapted into new lifestyle, new language, new holidays, but with the same discriminations. The breaking point happened on February 28, 1947, when the government initiated martial law and protesters were on the street. A few days later, the army came and started to kill all the protesters. I saw bodies lying on the streets, many and many of them. In the next couple of days, I could only see those mainlander pigs walking down the streets. No Formosan from before. I stopped writing in Chinese, stopped learning more Chinese, and stopped reading books from the Chinese philosopher, but focused on my medical studies in English and Japanese. Funny enough, we had a lot of Japanese faculty still working in the university. In the next couple of years, I felt powerless as the civil war in China gradually raged on and the prices of rice increased by almost 50% in just a couple of days. Things were not good. We called the mainlanders big since they were leeching off the people living here and did not see us as them. Heavy police presence was still everywhere. Finally, I finished my studies and worked in a hospital in southern Taiwan. I thought I could fulfill life with my wife, but I was later reported to the government because my name was on a list from a communist that surrendered. Later that year, in 1950, I was killed in Taipei.
I'm so sorry to hear that. If I could ask you which ethnicity you are, how would you respond?
It really depends on when you ask. I was forced to believe that I was Japanese when I was young, with the school, the government, and the society telling me that I was part of Japan, but I realized that I wasn't. I was not the same as the other Japanese. I was always part of the colony. I embraced the Chinese heritage later on as I realized the Japanese identity wasn't me, but I had to learn Mandarin, which is a complete foreign language to me. However, my ancestors shared a more similar culture with most of the Chinese, with similar traditions, holidays, and classics. With the oppression I faced by the Chinese government, I embraced my Taiwanese heritage. It was clear to us that we were different to the mainlanders due to the 50 years of separate rule. One of the generals that ordered attacks on the Taiwanese people, Peng Mengqi, wrote in a memoir that they wanted to treat the Taiwanese as the same people, but it was apparent that they were different, as they were Japanized for 50 years, an enemy they just fought against. He even goes on in saying, this airport was the one that attacked Hangzhou during the war, just to show how immediate these feelings were to the Chinese army, but this still does not justify how they treated us. I agree with him in a way, but this means that we are lost in between Japanese and Chinese. This Taiwanese identity was forced upon us in Taiwan because of this chaos during war times. The short period of transfer of political regime made everyone confused, which only made us more angry when the Chinese leached off of Taiwan. Especially the elites during that time organized a response after the February 28th incident, drafted the 32 demands, which demands equality in the governmental structure and protection of civil liberties, but they were in vain. The government responded by clamping down on the elites, killing many. A Taiwanese author at the time, Wu Zhuoliu, wrote in his Japanese book, Warfare with Asia, you see the forces of history carrying away everything, and you can't join any of them. Let's say you manage to convince yourself one way or the other, Japanese or Chinese, you won't convince anyone else. Everyone will think you're a spy. Come to think of it, you're sort of a misfit, aren't you? This was clearly saying there wasn't any meanings to being Taiwanese other than we were not Chinese or Japanese. In a way, it was a means for us to be in neither groups, to delegitimize their rules on our soil.
Your story is fascinating. It seems to me that your identity shift throughout the war happened because of external pressure, which made the grouping or ungrouping among your people necessary.
That is an interesting perspective. To me, it is a reactionary thought to fight along with my compatriots, though that meant something different as the war rages.
Your life story reminds me of my grandfather's struggles against Nazi Germany in World War II as well.
Tell me more about this.
My grandfather Udo was born in Graz in 1925. He later moved to Salzburg, both Austrian cities, with his family, but unfortunately lost his father very young. He was 13 years old during the Austrian Anschluss, the annexation of Austria to Germany, to the Third Reich, and was 18 when the war ended. So he was born Austrian, then went to an Austrian primary school during the Great Depression, which later became a German high school during the war, of course.
How did your grandfather view his ethnicity and nationality?
He very much felt Austrian throughout his entire life. Of course, there are significant cultural similarities between Austria and Germany, yet this makes Austrians focus on the differences even more in order to keep their own identity. Some important background information is that the Treaty of Saint-Germain and the Treaty of Versailles, after the First World War, specifically forbid Germany from annexing Austria. But after the Great Depression and many failed, weak or corrupt governments in Austria, the Black Party, basically the conservatives who were in power at the time, ÖVP or Österreichische Volkspartei, was getting scared that Germany will take over Austria eventually. And with every failed government, while the NSDAP was getting stronger and more successful across the border during the early 1930s, they desperately tried to unite and radicalize Austria more and more. My grandfather tells stories about a pin each child had to wear at school. It had the Austrian flag with an oak branch and the words "Be united, seid einig" on it. He said that children would regularly get hit if they did not wear these pins, although apparently the older teachers would be much stricter than the younger ones, since many of them were secretly hoping that Germany would take over Austria, an opinion that was illegal at the time. In addition, there was also a public holiday set up to commemorate the birth of the Austrian Republic on November 12th, which of course is not celebrated by Germany, a pure Austrian invention. However, the meaning behind the holiday was not united across the Austrian political spectrum, with the pro-Greater Germans and the Republicans at odds with each other on the narrative about the founding of the nations. Thus, the identity of the people at the time varied a lot based on their political affiliations before the Anschluss.
How did it change after the German occupation?
I'm not sure his identity has really changed. Germany justified the Anschluss through the Kulturgeist. This means that all German-speaking people, or Aryans, have a shared culture that should be united in one country, and therefore they would be reuniting lost siblings. What they completely ignored, though, is that Austria and Germany have never been the same country. They have always been separate, and especially Austria was very used to being part of a multi-nation state. While Germany might have seen the Kulturgeist as proof for Austria, which was later renamed Ostmark, to be ethnically Germans, Austrians had no problem being both German by nationality and Austrian by culture.
So when and how did Austrian nationalism return?
No doubt the Austrian population welcomed Germany with open arms. My grandfather tells stories of German soldiers who brought money, milk, sweets for children. After the Anschluss, each child could suddenly go on ski and hiking trips throughout the country, all expenses paid by the state, which of course was the only way he ever got to do something of the sorts, since his single mother had to support him and his sister in a horrible economy before. The German state paid security and child support to an extent that allowed both children to go to high school and finish their education. The lives of most Austrians improved significantly. Of course, only if you were not Jewish, a support of the party, straight, and... But as the war started, carried on, and especially by the end, when Germany was losing, Austrians felt as if they were brought into this war that was not theirs. The underground movement of Austrian independence began to rise again. Of course, calling yourself Austrian while it was still part of Germany would have been considered treason, which is why the Austrian way of protesting, especially in regions close to the German border, was by adapting their language. Austrians would speak with a distinct dialect, which is very difficult to understand if you did not grow up with it. To this day, even in my generation, our way of finding out if someone is German or Austrian happens via the way we talk and the vocabulary we use. up to the point where you can clearly differentiate between an Austrian born in Salzburg or a German born not even 5 kilometers away from the same city. The most prevalent example of this underground movement during my grandfather's time was his high school diploma in 1945. It was called Matura, the Austrian word, instead of Abitur, the German word. So the underground movement has risen even to the educational levels. And then, of course, when the war was lost and the Allies started occupying these countries, Austria was established again as its own country, not a part of Germany. They lived under French, English, Soviet, and American rule, with Vienna being split up just like Berlin for 10 years. In 1955, the narrative of Austria actually having nothing to do with the war and the Opferkultur, or victim culture, gained such popularity that the Allies left the country peacefully with the sole condition that Austria will never participate in any future wars and be a neutral country. And that condition holds to this day.
I see. There are definitely similarities and differences between our two cases. One similarity I see is the emphasis on language difference between the ruling regime and the people. This language differences, or simply an accent difference, would highlight the otherness between the ruling regime and the mass.
But there are striking differences too. One big difference is that Taiwan never had their own nation. Therefore, there were no regimes that proved the uniqueness of the Formosans. Rather, they were forced to be unique in order to create an identity against the identity of their ruling regime, right?
Yes, you are right. While in Austria's case, though divided, at first people agreed upon a nationality different from the Austrian.
This could be the reason why, even though Austria later embraced the greater German nation, it could quickly separate with the Germans and unite under Austrian identity again.
I have to go today, but thank you for the interview. I love learning about philosophy and ideologies.
Thank you, sir, for the interview.
No problem.
Now we head back with Eric to dissect the details of the interviews we've just heard. Welcome back, Eric.
Nice to be back, Victoria.
In the two cases today, we saw the identity of people changed a lot throughout World War II.
Indeed, World War II is a rupture to the world order, not only on the global level of ideology shifts, economics, or territorial change, but also on the personal level of national identity, the sense of belonging and well-being.
Let's dig deeper into this topic. The formation of national identity can be defined in many ways. One common way is the distinction between the premortalist and constructivist ideas. Simply put, premortalist views argues the sense of nationality and national identity is innate, fixed, and natural to an ethnicity, regardless of the other historical process. This notion stems from the Enlightenment, when rational classification was encouraged, which was applied to nationalism, where people were classified by nations by birth. One common perspective is the German school of thought, with Johann Gottfried Herder in the 19th century as an example. Under the premortalist ideas of cultural nationalism, Herder believed that national identity stems from Volksgeist, the unique spirit rooted in its language and culture, which is not based in politics or values per se, but language, art, culture, set of great men, religion, and collection of customs. Herder was born under a dynastic aristocratic regime which ruled Prussia. In a small provincial town, Marburg, then the Kingdom of Prussia, which after 1945 became Moravia in Poland. Although it's now Poland, Herder was very much German. Germany was split into several smaller and bigger kingdoms, yet besides these separation, all kingdoms were part of the German people, Volk. Therefore, the idea of Volksgeist is, even though these people are ruled under various political identities, they're inherently German, as they speak the same language and follow the German customs. In the cases for Taiwan and Austria, from ruling regimes' perspectives, both nations fell under this Volksgeist. Herder's definition and approach to nationalism gave justification to regimes like the Nazis, the Republic of China, and nowadays even Putin, that all people who are united through a language and cultural customs should also be united by their nations. However, this cannot explain the shift in Yi's identity throughout the war times, as he felt being Japanese first, but later Chinese, and then neither at some point.
The constructivist views argues that the concept of the nation is not fixed nor predetermined. These theories counter the previous Enlightenment ideas as no scientific definitions of a nation can be devised. One representative of this view is Irish historian Benedict Anderson, who famously argued that nations are imagined political communities and imagined as both limited and sovereign. He states that nations are imagined because the people of the nations do not know each other, but live the image of their communion. This constructed commonality is the foundation of a nation. Therefore, national identity is not innate to a person and can change because of external forces. His argument ties in well with many phenomena during the 19th and 20th centuries, such as the self-determination movement and the effects of printed language after the Industrial Revolution, and was based mainly with East Asian cases. For Austria and Taiwan's cases, this perspective can illustrate the reactionary rise of a counter-national identity after an ethnically similar country's occupation. You see, even though Austria and Germany are similar in a lot of aspects, as the Austrians saw the German war as something not part of Austria, they do not see fighting for the German nation Austrian. Similarly for Ye, he had first seen the commonality with the Japanese as he was raised through many Japanese customs and festivities. However, he quickly saw that many Japanese did not have the same imagined community with him as they treated him as part of the colonial subject. After the war, he first found belonging with the Chinese community, just to quickly realize that they did not view him the same too. This triggers and bores the Taiwanese identity in him so that he can find a group of people that can imagine a community with Chinese traditions but also Japanese traits.
The last perspective that will be introduced here is Ernest Gellner's theory of nationalism. As an Austrian Jewish immigrant to the UK from Czechoslovakia, Gellner does not believe in premortalism, but view nationalism under a historical perspective of modernity. Simply, Gellner believes that nationalism is part of the historical process from an agrarian society to an industrial one, and that the nation is a contingent outcome of its process. He agrees with Anderson that nationality is constructed and the result of modernism, but emphasized on a high culture of a nation that would create a sense of cultural homogeny. It unites people into a nation. This high culture is meant to connect many different individuals through a common language, customs, and convictions, and is often produced and standardized through the state actors such as education, that can only exist after the Industrial Revolution, as physical and social mobility were prominent. It is also possible to explain Austria and Taiwan's national identity through Gellner's theory. In Austria, the oak branch and the flag that children were forced to wear in school showed how the state used common symbolism to boost the Austrian national identity before the war. This could be the foundation of future reactionary national identity that emerged after the annexation by Germany. In Taiwan's case, we saw the education system by the Japanese created a sense of nationhood for both the Formosans and the Japanese in Taiwan. However, they deliberately created two school systems to depict the difference in high culture between colonized and colonizers. This had an impact and later emerged on the Taiwanese identity in response to the Republic of China's autocracy, as people did not revert back to their Japanese identity, but decided to pursue a new high culture, only within the local Formosans.
Using the various perspectives, we see how national identity is formed and can shift during a moment of global historical rupture. The constructivist approach illustrates how these new identities, from the creation of high culture before the occupation to the new imagined community, in response to the othering by the ruling regime, while the primordialist perspective demonstrated the legitimization of the annexation by the ruling regimes. Not only so, we also view these identity changes from the perspective of the people themselves. Using their diary or oral history, we interpret and understand why and what made them change during the turbulent times. Hopefully, this bottom-up approach let you feel something personal throughout our exploration through national identity during the World War.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Historyverse. We hope you enjoyed your historical comparisons of similar phenomena in vastly different parts of the world, and how we were able to connect and compare them as well as our historical debate. It was lovely having you, and we hope you have a great day. Stay wonderful all.